Rain poured down like a curtain in the bleak winter evening. The empty streets shimmered under cold water, and the streetlights reflected off the wet pavement like streaks of memories that had never dried. Inside the tinted window of a luxury car, Alexander Carter sat in silence, his eyes heavy with fatigue. The phone in his hand lit up one last time, battery low, 1%. He sighed and signaled the driver to stop in front of a convenience store, the only one still lit on this deserted street. The bell chimed gently as he walked in. The air smelled of instant noodles and cheap packaging, a scent that hit him like a blow from the past. This wasn't his world, a successful businessman whose life revolved around contracts, deals, and power, but fate often takes people down paths they never expect. In the far corner, near the baby formula shelf, a scene made him freeze. A little girl, soaked, her hair plastered to her face, clutching a dented carton of milk, was looking up at the cashier with pleading eyes. Her voice trembled. "I have $3. Can I please buy this? My baby brother has a fever." No one answered. The cashier turned to Alexander, silently asking for help. In that moment, his perfectly controlled world trembled. The girl was too small, too fragile, but those eyes, they reminded him of something old, something painful, something he had never healed from. He stepped forward, said nothing, and pulled out his wallet. Placing a $20 bill on the counter, he said, "Give her the milk. And add some cookies if that's enough." The girl stared at him, stunned. Her eyes widened with surprise and hope. She didn't say thank you. She just stood there, then bowed deeply and ran out into the rain, clutching the milk. Alexander stood frozen. No one knew that this moment, a random stop on a rainy night, would set in motion a series of events that would change his life forever. The wind howled like a wounded animal outside, tearing through the city streets with a ferocity that matched the pounding rain. Streetlights flickered like dying stars, and pedestrians scurried for cover under awnings and into shadowed doorways. A relentless storm had descended on the city, draping it in a chaotic blend of rain, thunder, and ghostly silence between rumbles. Inside a dimly lit convenience store on the corner of 42nd and Hayes, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as the automatic door groaned open, letting in a violent gust of wind and a man dressed in an expensive black trench coat. His presence was sharp, abrupt, a jagged blade in a place meant for small, mundane comforts. Alexander Carter, 36, CEO of Carter Global, a man known for his ruthless business instincts and emotional detachment, stood at the entrance, brushing rainwater from his tailored coat. His dark hair, slick with moisture, clung to his sharp cheekbones. The collar of his shirt was damp, and he exhaled with visible irritation. He hadn't meant to stop here. His phone had died moments ago, in the middle of a critical call with investors in Singapore. His driver was circling blocks, unreachable. Forced off his path by circumstance and storm, he had ducked into this unremarkable corner store in hopes of finding a phone charger. The store was mostly empty, a teenage cashier behind the counter scrolling on his phone, racks of chips and candy, and fluorescent-lit aisles stretching into soft shadows. The buzz of a refrigerator and the hum of rain outside filled the silence. But then he heard it. A quiet sniffle. Soft, tentative. Almost missed beneath the hiss of the rain against the windows. Alexander turned. Near the dairy section, half hidden by the shelves, stood a small figure. Soaking wet. Shivering. A little girl, no more than 5, in a faded pink raincoat that hung heavily on her tiny frame. Her golden hair was plastered to her forehead, her eyes wide and red from crying. She stood barefoot, her shoes had either been lost or discarded, and clutched a small, crumpled dollar bill in her trembling hands. He stared, confused for a moment, unsure if she was real. Then she stepped closer to the counter, placing a small carton of milk onto the surface. Her voice came out in a broken whisper. "Excuse me. I need to buy this." The teenage cashier looked up from his phone, startled, and glanced at the milk. He raised an eyebrow. "$2.50, he said flatly. The little girl held out her single dollar. "My baby brother, he's really hot and can't stop crying," she mumbled. "Mama didn't come home. Please. I just need the milk." Her voice cracked. The cashier hesitated. Looked around. Then shook his head. "That's not enough, kid. Sorry." Alexander watched the scene unfold in rigid silence. Something, a tug in his chest, sharp and unfamiliar, pulled him closer. He stepped forward, the sound of his shoes against the linoleum floor drawing both their eyes. The little girl turned and looked up at him. Those eyes, full of fear, exhaustion, and something far too old for her age, met his. Alexander had never believed in fate. Or emotion. Or things like signs. But in that moment, standing there in the middle of a storm with a lifeless phone and a soaked jacket, looking into the eyes of a child too small to carry so much sorrow, he felt something shift. "Let her have it," he said quietly, pulling a wallet from his coat. The cashier blinked. Sure, man." Alexander handed him a 20 without looking. Then knelt down to the girl's level. He didn't know why. "You said your brother's sick?" She nodded slowly. Her lips trembled. "He's just a baby. Mama said she'd be back last night, but she didn't. He's hot and won't eat. We don't have no more milk." His jaw tightened. "Where do you live?" She hesitated. Then pointed. 3 blocks. Down there. The brick building with the blue door." The storm outside raged louder, as if protesting what he was about to do. But he didn't care. He looked at her soaked form, the blisters on her bare feet, and stood. "You're not walking home like that. I'll take you." The girl stepped back slightly, afraid. "I'm not a bad man," Alexander said, almost awkwardly. "But it's dangerous out there. You're freezing. Let me help." Still uncertain, she finally gave a tiny nod. He scooped her into his arms gently, her small body trembling against his chest. She clutched the milk carton tightly as if it were treasure. As the door swung open again and the storm screamed its fury, Alexander stepped into the night with the child in his arms, and unknowingly, into something far deeper than a passing act of kindness. The building she'd pointed to was indeed 3 blocks away, old, cracked, and barely holding together. The blue paint on the door was peeling. He had to carry her up 3 narrow flights of stairs that smelled of mildew and rot. Inside the apartment, the air was heavy and stale. There were signs of neglect, a broken window covered with cardboard, dirty dishes in the sink, and a single mattress in the living room corner where a baby lay crying, face flushed, tiny body writhing. Alexander didn't think. He removed his coat, wrapped it around the girl, and walked straight to the baby. He touched the infant's forehead, burning. The child was burning up. He turned to the girl. "When was the last time your mom was here?" "Yesterday morning. She said she'd get food, but never came back." His mind raced. There was no adult. No supplies. No food. No medicine. He pulled out his phone again, still dead. Without hesitation, he scooped up the baby and looked at the girl. "Come with me. I can't leave him alone." "You won't. We're taking him to the hospital. He needs help now." For the first time, she nodded with trust. Hours passed in a blur. The emergency room. The heat lamps. The 4-drip. The baby's fever was stabilized. A nurse gave Emily a blanket and a sandwich. Social workers were called. Questions were asked. Alexander stayed. He sat silently in the corner of the hospital room, watching Emily as she clutched her brother's hand and whispered to him. Her cheeks were pink again. Her eyes brighter. He didn't understand what had possessed him to stay. But something about that stormy night, that shivering little girl and the baby's weak cries, had cracked a piece of his carefully constructed armor. He wasn't thinking about profit margins or stockholders now. He was thinking about 2 kids alone in a broken world. And how he'd stumbled into their lives, or maybe how fate had sent them into his. That night, long after the rain had stopped, Alexander sat in his car outside the hospital. He looked down at a small pink sock Emily had dropped when she fell asleep. He held it in his hand like it was something sacred. And for the first time in years, Alexander Carter felt the weight of something other than power or wealth. He felt purpose. The rain had not let up since Alexander Carter left the convenience store. Back in the driver's seat of his sleek black car, the hum of the engine felt distant, almost muted by the weight of the moment that had just passed. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale. But he wasn't thinking about the road. He was thinking about her. Emily. A fragile, trembling 5-year-old with soaked shoes and sorrowful eyes too old for her face. Her voice still echoed in his mind, soft, cracking through the drizzle like a spark. Em tre chow dang sat chow. Bac lam on. He could not forget that. As the windshield wipers swept back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm, something long buried in his chest stirred. A memory he had kept locked away, behind layers of ice and silence, clawed its way to the surface. He was 9. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and despair. His mother lay on a narrow bed, face pale, lips cracked from fever. He remembered how he had tried to hold her hand, but her fingers were too thin, too weak to grip back. They'd said she could survive, with treatment. A few injections, a simple procedure. But they didn't have the money. He had watched his father beg, plead, yell. But no one helped them. No one cared. One night, he walked in with a cup of water, and her bed was empty. Just like that. No warning. No goodbye. Just the silence. The raindrops seemed to fall harder as the memory tightened its grip. Alexander exhaled sharply, pulling out of the parking lot. Instead of heading to his penthouse in the city, his car turned in the opposite direction, back toward the convenience store. When he got there, Emily was gone. He walked into the shop, the bell chiming above him. "You seen the little girl?" he asked the cashier, his voice low and rough. The teen behind the counter looked up, slightly startled. Yeah. She left maybe 10 minutes ago. Took off that way. She was crying." Alexander didn't thank him. He turned and bolted out, his shoes splashing in puddles. The rain had turned into a full downpour now, drenching him in seconds, but he didn't care. He jogged toward the alley behind the shop, past the dumpsters, past the rusted metal fences. Then he saw her. Curled beneath the back awning of an old apartment complex, holding a bundled-up figure wrapped in a towel. A baby, no, a toddler, burning up with fever. "Emily," he called. She startled, trying to shield her brother with her arms. "Stay back," she said. "I didn't steal anything." "I know," Alexander replied softly, kneeling. "I'm not here to hurt you." He reached out slowly, hands open. "Let me help. Please." Emily's lips trembled. Her brother was limp against her chest, tiny cheeks flushed with a dangerous red. Alexander felt the full weight of that memory from years ago bear down on him, how no one had come for him. No one had helped. He wouldn't let it happen again. He lifted the boy carefully, cradling him like porcelain. "We're going to the hospital." Emily followed him in silence, soaked and shivering. In the car, Alexander turned up the heat. The boy, Oliver, she said his name was, moaned weakly in the back seat. At the hospital, the nurses rushed Oliver to emergency as soon as they arrived. Emily clung to Alexander's coat like a lifeline as they filled out forms, answered questions. She didn't have an ID. No insurance. Nothing. Alexander took charge. "Put the bills in my name," he told the front desk. "All of it." The nurse blinked. "Sir, that will be expensive. The child might need." "I said all of it." Emily's eyes widened. "Why are you helping us?" Alexander hesitated. The words were heavy on his tongue. "Because no one helped me." Hours passed. They waited. Emily eventually fell asleep on a chair beside him, her small frame curled under his jacket. The sight of her like that, trusting him, leaning into his side, tightened something in his chest he hadn't felt in decades. Something warm. Something terrifying. Then the doctor came. "Your brother will be okay," he told Emily, once she was awake. "You brought him just in time." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, clinging to Alexander. He patted her head awkwardly, unsure how to comfort her. "You were brave," he said. "He's lucky to have you." But just as the relief settled in, another voice shattered the calm. "Mr. Carter?" He turned. A woman in a dark suit approached, mid-30s, sharp eyes, stiff demeanor. "I'm Detective Rowe. We need to talk. The whirlpool begins." They spoke in a private room. Rowe pulled out a file, placed it on the table. "Emily Johnson. Reported missing 3 weeks ago. Her mother is under investigation for child neglect and illegal activity. You were the last person seen with her tonight." Alexander's brow furrowed. She was alone, with a sick baby, in the rain. "What would you have done?" Rowe didn't flinch. "I'm not here to question your intentions. But your name came up in other reports. Whistleblowers. Real estate scandals. Lawsuits buried quietly." Alexander leaned back, suddenly alert. "What does that have to do with a child in danger?" Rowe gave him a long, unreadable look. "That's what we're trying to figure out." Back in the waiting area, Emily was looking around nervously. She tugged at his sleeve when he returned. "Can we go home now?" Alexander knelt down. "Emily, where is home?" She didn't answer. Just looked away. That silence said everything. The unraveling truth. Over the next few days, Alexander hired private investigators, lawyers, and caretakers for Emily and Oliver. He moved them into one of his company's guest apartments and kept their presence quiet. But something didn't sit right. Documents uncovered from child services revealed disturbing reports. Emily's mother was tied to an underground loan shark ring. There were rumors of exploitation, children being used for illegal errands. Emily may have run away with Oliver after witnessing something terrible. That simple act of kindness had pulled Alexander into a storm. His company's name was suddenly being dragged into news headlines. Billionaire Carter involved in missing child case. Suspected corruption tied to real estate mogul. Reporters hounded his offices. Clients backed out of deals. All because he'd helped a little girl buy milk. But he didn't regret it. Not even for a second. The real danger. One night, a brick crashed through the window of the apartment where Emily stayed. A note was attached. She saw too much. Stay out of this. Alexander was at her side in minutes. They know where we are, he said. We're moving again. Emily clung to his hand. I'm scared. He looked into her eyes, the same fear he once held as a child. I won't let anything happen to you. I promise. And for the first time in years, he meant it. He wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was something more. He was her protector. The wind howled as Alexander Carter parked his black Maserati in front of the crumbling apartment complex. The rain, persistent and icy, beat against the windshield like impatient knuckles on a door. He stared up at the dimly lit building, its windows flickering with unstable light, and tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Emily had said this was where she lived. Something about that didn't sit right with him. Not after seeing her shiver in soaked clothes, begging for milk with those wide, desperate eyes. He stepped out, pulling the collar of his coat tight as the rain tried to crawl into his bones. The hallways inside reeked of mildew and stale smoke. Paint peeled from the walls like neglected skin. It was a place where hope came to die quietly. Apartment 2B. He reached the door and hesitated for a moment before knocking. He wasn't sure what he expected, gratitude, maybe, or confusion. What he didn't expect was the door to be yanked open and a woman standing there with fire in her eyes. Who are you? She demanded, voice sharp, low, like the crack of dry twigs. Sarah. It had to be Emily's mother. She looked nothing like her daughter. Where Emily was innocence and light, Sarah was guarded shadows and tension. Her eyes darted past him, scanning the hallway like a hunted animal. I'm Alexander Carter, he said carefully. I met your daughter last night. She was trying to buy milk. She said her baby brother was sick. Sarah's face twisted, not in appreciation or warmth, but fear. A deep, sudden fear that tightened every muscle in her body. You followed her? No, he said, hands raised. I gave her a ride back. She told me your address. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. That she's all right. She stepped back, partially closing the door. You need to leave. Now. Ma'am. I said go. Her voice trembled now, not with anger, but with panic. She was holding the door with both hands, her body behind it like a shield. And then he saw it, the bruises on her wrist. Faint, but unmistakable. Alexander narrowed his eyes. Is someone hurting you? Sarah didn't answer. Her gaze locked on his, and for a fleeting moment, the truth flared behind her defenses. She was terrified. Not of him, but of something, someone else. I can help, he said softly. Whatever it is, I can help. Sarah shook her head violently. No one can help. Just go. Before she bit her lip, cutting herself off. Too late. Before he comes. Alexander froze. That was it. The real reason. She wasn't just struggling financially. She was hiding. From someone dangerous. Before he could say anything more, the door slammed shut. He stood there for a moment, the echo of the door vibrating in his ears. Then a soft voice caught his attention. Mr. Carter? He turned. Emily stood at the end of the hallway, holding a damp stuffed bunny. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks pale, but her eyes still held that flicker of hope, the kind that only existed in children who hadn't yet learned how cruel the world could be. Why are you here? She asked. He walked over and knelt to her level. I wanted to see if you're okay. She nodded solemnly. Baby Noah still has a fever. Mommy cries a lot. Alexander placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Do you know who made Mommy cry? Emily looked down. The man with the tattoos. His jaw tightened. What man? Emily didn't answer, only clutched her bunny tighter. Back in his penthouse apartment that night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He sat by the fireplace, scotch untouched on the table, his thoughts racing. He'd seen that look before, on his own father's face. The haunted look of someone running from demons they couldn't escape. The next morning, he made calls. Pulled up property records. Security camera feeds. He even had one of his private investigators, Harris, check into Sarah Johnson. What he got back chilled him. Sarah had been married once. The husband, Mason Reed, was a former Marine turned private contractor. Discharged under mysterious circumstances. There was a restraining order filed a year ago. Violated twice. Then Sarah vanished. No forwarding address. Just disappeared. Until now. That explained the bruises. The fear. And the paranoia. Sarah wasn't just poor, she was hiding from a violent ex-husband who had already hunted her once. Alexander stared at the file, rage bubbling inside him. He had seen too many people broken by abusers. He refused to stand by and watch it happen again. 3 days passed. Alexander returned to the apartment with a bag of groceries and medicine. This time, Sarah didn't answer. Emily did. Mommy's sleeping, she whispered. She was crying last night again. He entered cautiously. The place was worse than he remembered, a leaking ceiling, mold on the walls, barely any furniture. He found Sarah on the couch, curled into herself, Noah bundled beside her. Don't wake her, Emily pleaded. She doesn't sleep much. Alexander sat with the children, heating up soup on the rusty stovetop. When Sarah finally stirred, her eyes flicked open in alarm. You shouldn't be here, she rasped. I brought food. And medicine for Noah. Sarah tried to sit up, her legs weak. He'll find us. Let him try, Alexander said coldly. I have security. And connections. If you want protection, I can give it. She stared at him, tears welling. Why? Why would you help us? Alexander hesitated, then said the words he hadn't spoken in decades. Because once, when I was a boy, I watched my mother die in a hospital waiting room because we couldn't afford treatment. And no one helped us. Not even one kind stranger. I'm not going to let history repeat itself. For the first time, Sarah's defenses faltered. Her eyes softened. Her lips trembled. Okay, she whispered. But if we do this, if I trust you, you have to know what you're getting into. Alexander nodded. Tell me everything. Sarah told him everything. About Mason's explosive temper. The way he changed after Afghanistan. The bruises she hid. The night she finally fled with the children, clutching a duffel bag and nothing else. How he tracked her across 2 states. How she lived off cash jobs, always looking over her shoulder. How she found refuge in this decrepit apartment, the only place with no paper trail. I thought if I stayed invisible, he'd stop, she said, voice cracking. But 2 nights ago, I saw his truck. Outside. He knows. Alexander's blood turned to ice. He's coming, she whispered. I know it. And he believed her. That night, Alexander moved Sarah, Emily, and Noah to a secure condo under an alias. He hired 2 off-duty cops as protection. But even as he surrounded them with safety, he knew this wouldn't end quietly. Mason Reed wouldn't just stop. Men like him never did. He'd come, and when he did, Alexander would be waiting. Not as a businessman. Not as a cold billionaire. But as the man who refused to let another child suffer like he once did. As the man who would finally break the cycle of silence. The late autumn wind howled through the city like a warning from nature itself. Rain lashed the windows of Alexander Carter's penthouse as he stared into the distance, the skyline of Manhattan distorted by the water streaks running down the glass. He hadn't slept well in days, ever since he met Emily and Sarah. The child's trembling form, clutching a half-empty carton of milk, and Sarah's hollow eyes haunted him. There was something else too, something unspoken. And now, it was beginning to make sense. The pieces had started falling into place after he quietly asked one of his private investigators to look into Sarah's background. Not to invade her privacy, but to protect her. To understand what danger might be lurking. What he discovered chilled him to his core. Sarah's ex-husband, a man named Lucas Reed, had been released from prison 2 weeks ago. Drug charges. Assault. A lengthy record of domestic abuse. And now, someone matching his description had been spotted near Sarah's building. Twice. Alexander gripped his phone tighter as he listened to the latest update from his investigator. He's been circling her apartment. We have it on camera. No direct contact yet, but he's watching. Alexander's voice was low and firm. I want a man stationed at that building 24/7. Discreet, but armed. If he so much as steps onto the property, I want to know. Yes, sir. The line went dead, but Alexander remained frozen, the words of the anonymous call from earlier echoing in his mind. Back off, Carter. She's mine. You get in my way, you'll wish you hadn't. The voice had been raspy, calm, but there was venom behind it. And purpose. When Alexander arrived at Sarah's apartment that evening, the rain had begun again, a steady patter like a ticking clock. He knocked quietly. Inside, Emily's laughter rang out faintly, a sound he was relieved to hear. A moment later, Sarah opened the door. She looked tired, her eyes rimmed red, but she tried to mask it with a polite smile. You shouldn't keep coming here, she said gently, stepping aside to let him in. It's not safe. Alexander looked around. The apartment was neat but sparse. Emily sat on the floor, drawing with broken crayons. She looked up and beamed when she saw him. You brought cookies last time, she giggled. Sarah's smile faltered at that, and she turned away. Alexander stepped closer, lowering his voice. Sarah, I know. She froze. Know what? About Lucas. About the fact that he's out. And that he's watching. Her face went pale. She moved quickly to the window and pulled the curtain aside, peering out as if he might be there, lurking in the shadows. How? She whispered. Did he call you? Yes. And I had someone look into it. He's been spotted here. He's waiting. She sank into the worn couch, her hands trembling. I thought maybe he'd moved on. That maybe we were finally safe. Alexander didn't hesitate. Come with me. I have a place upstate. No one will find you there. You and Emily will be protected. Sarah shook her head fiercely. I can't. If I run, he'll know I'm scared. That gives him power. And I won't take your charity. This isn't charity, Alexander said quietly. This is protection. And you're not running, you're making a tactical retreat. She looked at him, skeptical. You think you can outsmart him? No. I know I can. But you have to trust me. That night, Sarah agreed. Not for her sake, but for Emily's. Within an hour, Alexander had his security team discreetly load their most essential belongings into a black SUV. Emily, sleepy but excited, sat next to him in the back seat, clutching her stuffed bunny. Sarah sat in front, silent. Halfway through the drive, Sarah broke the silence. "You're not doing this just to be kind, are you?" she asked. Alexander met her gaze in the rearview mirror. "No. I'm doing this because no one helped my mother when she needed it. I won't let history repeat itself." Sarah turned away, but he saw her shoulders tremble slightly. Not from fear, but from the vulnerability of being truly seen. The safe house was nestled deep in the woods, private, secure, and guarded. Alexander had bought it years ago for retreats but had barely used it. Now, it served a higher purpose. The days passed quietly. Emily thrived, chasing squirrels and reading picture books by the fireplace. Sarah began to relax, but only slightly. Her phone remained off, her eyes always drifting to the window. Then came the breach. One night, around 2 a.m., one of the motion sensors at the perimeter tripped. Alexander, sleeping lightly, was already on his feet before the alarm sounded. The security team mobilized quickly, checking the cameras. A figure in a hoodie, tall and thin, had crossed into the outer boundary, then vanished back into the forest. "He's testing us," Alexander said grimly. "Trying to see how far he can go." Sarah was pale when she joined him in the living room. "It's him, isn't it?" "Yes. I can't keep doing this." Alexander placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we stop running. We end it." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "How?" "By setting a trap." They returned to the city under tight surveillance. Alexander publicly resumed his schedule, making it appear as though nothing had changed. Meanwhile, Sarah and Emily stayed in a separate penthouse he owned, out of sight, guarded by men he trusted with his life. He leaked just enough information, false ones, through social media and public sightings to lure Lucas in. It didn't take long. 3 days later, Lucas made his move. He broke into the original apartment, expecting to find Sarah. Instead, he walked into a room full of armed guards. He was arrested on the spot, but not without a fight. It took 2 men to subdue him. He screamed as he was dragged away. "She's mine. You hear me? Mine." When it was over, Sarah couldn't stop crying. Not from fear, but from relief. Emily didn't understand all the details, only that the scary man wouldn't bother them anymore. That night, as they sat around the fire in the penthouse, Sarah turned to Alexander. "Why did you do all this? Risk so much?" Alexander looked at Emily, then at Sarah. "Because no one deserves to live in fear. And because I think we all deserve a second chance." For the first time, Sarah smiled, a real one, not one forced by survival. And for the first time in years, Alexander Carter felt human again. The days that followed were tense, as if the very air around them had thickened with the weight of anticipation. After the chilling threat Alexander received over the phone, his voice calm but soaked in menace, he knew the danger wasn't over. He couldn't walk away. Not now. Alexander Carter, the man once defined by steel and solitude, was now entangled in something he never expected, a fierce determination to protect. It was no longer just about right and wrong. It was about Emily. About Sarah. About rewriting a past he never got to change. That night, as rain lashed against the high-rise windows of his penthouse, Alexander stood alone in his study. The city lights flickered below, oblivious to the storm that raged not just outside, but within him. He picked up his phone and made a call. "James. I need private security. Discreet, but capable. Round-the-clock protection." A pause on the other end. "For a woman and a child." Another pause. "No, I'm not in trouble," Alexander said, more to himself than the man on the line. "But they are." Within hours, 2 seasoned bodyguards were assigned to watch over Sarah and Emily. They moved into a secure apartment complex under Alexander's name, the address known only to a handful of trusted individuals. Cameras were installed. Routes were changed. Every precaution was taken. But Alexander knew it wasn't enough. Because monsters didn't always hide under beds. Sometimes they hid in broad daylight, just waiting for a crack in the plan. One evening, Sarah and Emily were at a nearby park with one of the guards when Alexander received a call. "Sir, we've spotted someone. Watching them from across the street." Matches the description. Alexander's blood turned to ice. "I'm on my way." He drove like a man possessed. The Bentley roared through the city streets, dodging traffic and red lights. By the time he arrived, the man was gone, but not without leaving his mark. A note. Left in Emily's backpack. It was scribbled in shaky, furious handwriting. "You can't keep her forever." Sarah was shaking, holding Emily tightly in her arms. Emily, sensing the tension, remained quiet, her small fingers curled into Alexander's coat as he knelt beside her. "He was here," Sarah whispered. "He touched her things. He's getting closer." Alexander didn't hesitate. He pressed his phone against his ear, his tone sharp as a blade. "Activate the second protocol." It was time to escalate. He hired a private investigator to dig into the ex-husband's activities. The man had a restraining order, one he had now clearly violated. But Alexander knew the justice system was slow. Too slow. So he used what he had: influence. Within days, he had gathered evidence, surveillance footage, witness statements, and records of the threatening phone call. He handed it over to a high-ranking friend in law enforcement. "He's stalking a minor. Violating a restraining order. Add that to his prior record, he's a walking arrest warrant." That same night, the police moved in. The man was taken into custody, though the process was far from clean. He fought. Screamed. Swore vengeance. "You'll pay for this. I'll find her, I swear it." Alexander watched from a distance, fists clenched. The man's voice echoed in his mind like a festering wound. But even with him behind bars, Alexander didn't relax. He knew the damage had already been done, to Sarah's peace, to Emily's sense of safety. A few days later, it happened. Alexander had taken Emily out for a short walk near the apartment complex. The guards were nearby, but in that split second, just 1 second, a figure lunged from the alleyway. Not the ex-husband. One of his old associates. A lanky man with a switchblade and desperate eyes. Alexander moved faster than instinct. He shoved Emily behind him and took the slash across his shoulder instead. The pain was immediate and searing, but he didn't flinch. He held the man back with all his strength until the bodyguards tackled him to the ground. Emily was screaming. Blood stained Alexander's shirt. But he didn't care. All he could think was, "She's safe." That night in the hospital, the wound was stitched. Minor, they said. Nothing vital hit. But to Sarah, it was everything. She sat at his bedside, Emily curled asleep in the chair beside him. The fluorescent lights made her eyes look glassy, tired, but determined. "You could have died," she whispered. "I didn't." "You didn't have to." "I did," he said, voice hoarse. "I'd do it again." For a long time, she didn't speak. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached out and gently touched his fingers. "No one's ever fought for us like that," she said. "Not even once." Alexander didn't reply. Instead, he turned his head toward Emily. The little girl was clutching a small stuffed bear, one he'd bought for her. Her breaths were soft, even, peaceful. "She deserves to sleep without fear," he said. "So do you." A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek. "Why are you doing this?" He looked at her, his expression stripped of the cold mask he used to wear. "Because I couldn't save my own mother," he said quietly. "But maybe I can save someone else's." Silence settled between them, not empty, but full of meaning. A bridge had formed, built on pain, trust, and sacrifice. Weeks passed. With Alexander's help, Sarah was able to secure full legal custody of Emily. A team of lawyers, hired discreetly, ensured the ex-husband's parental rights were permanently revoked. New identification papers were issued under a different surname. They were free. One afternoon, Alexander returned to the hospital for a final checkup. The stitches were gone, the wound healing. As he walked through the hallway, he spotted Emily sitting on the windowsill, gazing out at the sky. When she saw him, her face lit up. "Uncle Alex," she chirped, running to him. He crouched down, catching her in his arms. "There's my brave girl," he said with a smile. She looked up at him, her voice small. "You won't leave us, right?" His throat tightened. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I promised." Later that day, as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting golden light into the hospital room, Alexander sat beside Emily, holding her tiny hand in his. Sarah stood nearby, arms crossed gently, a faint smile on her lips. The past hadn't vanished. The scars remained, on Alexander's shoulder, on Sarah's heart, in Emily's eyes. But they weren't just reminders of pain. They were proof of survival. Of transformation. "Whatever happens," Alexander murmured, watching Emily breathe softly, "no one will ever hurt you again. I swear it." Outside, the world continued. But inside that room, a new chapter had begun. Not out of obligation. Not out of guilt. But out of love. A family, not by blood, but by choice. And sometimes, that was stronger than anything. An ambulance siren sliced through the quiet of the night. The city hospital glowed white and sterile. On the third floor, in a softly lit room, Emily, the little girl who once begged for milk in the rain, was sleeping peacefully. Her arm was bandaged from a scrape she got when Alexander shielded her from a sudden attack by the man chasing them. Alexander sat beside her. His shirt was stained with dried blood at the shoulder, a shallow wound, but enough to remind him that doing the right thing often comes at a cost. Across from him, Sarah sat silently, her hands clenched, eyes red but full of relief. They no longer had to run. The man who had terrorized their lives had finally been caught, thanks to the evidence Alexander had quietly gathered. "You didn't have to do all of this," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse. Alexander looked at her, his gaze steady. "I couldn't save my mother back then, but this time, I didn't stand by." She turned toward her daughter, peacefully smiling in her sleep, and nodded slowly. Their eyes met. Not much needed to be said. Between them was a gratitude deeper than words, a bond forged through chaos and pain. Alexander leaned down, gently took Emily's hand. She stirred, blinking slowly, and asked in a sleepy voice, Will you stay, mister? He paused. A long silence hung in the air. Then he smiled and nodded. I'll be here, Emily. I promise. No one's going to hurt you anymore. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. The streetlights blurred into the early morning fog, as if a dark chapter was finally closing, and a new, brighter one had just begun.